Rome, 19th July 1943, late morning. The Basilica bell at San Lorenzo ticks toward noon with a cracked bronze throat, each pulse trembling the ledger under Teresa Ricci's palm. Carbon copies smell of ammonia and coal dust. The freight office breathes like a tired animal. Grain, livestock, artillery spares, the arithmetic of a city at war, marches in neat lines until a shadow stitches the window. The yard is hot creosote and iron, rails ticking softly as if rehearsing for something. A switch engine coughs, then goes silent. For a second, the whole place listens. The sound arrives low and steady from the Tyrrhenian. A single thread, Teresa thinks, one contrail in the summer glaze. She steps outside and shades her eyes. The thread multiplies, splitting into tidy ranks of silver motes. B-17S holding formation with the patience of clocks. Sirens yawn to life. Someone crosses himself and mutters of Ciampino, of San Lorenzo and Littorio, the rails that feed Rome and the fronts beyond. Teresa tucks the ledger under her arm as if paper could steady earth. Over 20,000 feet up, Lieutenant Jack Darrow of the 97th Bomb Group feels the right inboard's note settle sweet as a chord. He rides the checklist with a machinist's reverence, mixture auto-rich, intercoolers trimmed, cowl flaps set. Oxygen bites chalky at the back of the throat. The fortress hums like a factory on schedule, elements sliding into interval so precisely it feels inevitable. On the step, the bombardier murmurs. Bomb bay safe. Stand by below, the city's rail lattice sharpens into a geometry of consequence. At Ciampino, Sergente Maggiore Enzo Villani runs a hand along his Machi C205's warm flank. Pietro, his mechanic, cinches the harness while the DB605 coughs awake with that throaty confidence good engines own. The squadron chief's voice is the grammar of scarcity. Radios temperamental, tyres worn but serviceable, fuel fine if the chase is short, hours on the motor counted like heirlooms. Enzo nods once, climbs, and rolls toward the sun. He will try a head-on pass, briefed as best chance against a fortress box, before the P-38s wall him off. Flak opens in black flowers above the city, gravel thrown into heaven. Darrow feels the ship tighten as the formation walks into the burst pattern. "Doors," says the bombardier. Bay panels split, a steel eyelid blinking. Loadout is ordinary and terrible. General-purpose bombs, roughly 6,000 pounds on this ship, some with delay fuses meant to curl rail and split joints hours later. The nose dips a hair. The sight finds its step. Steady. Steady. The yard receives the first hit through the soles. Papers jump on Teresa's desk before sound arrives. Glass becomes rain. Sleepers spit splinters. The rails shout from under stone. Training says to take shelter. Habit keeps her standing. Clerks stand when trains pass. A woman prays to St. Lawrence, patron of the district. A man counts like a metronome, as if numbers could bargain with iron. Enzo cuts the angle and meets the first chin turret tracers. Spears of light flung straight at his face. He shears right, feels the Veltro's wings bite the air, and dives through a seam where two boxes overlap and defensive arcs thin. A P-38 drops a courteous, deadly block that forces him wide, then slides back to station like a shepherd dog. It is not contempt, it is management. Enzo tries again, more cautious. Flak bursts step closer, indifferent to flags. The ocean flashes hammered silver off Darrow's wing. Sight picture holds. Pickle. The ship lifts when the weight goes, sudden, indecent relief. Columns rise from switch yards, black, brown, then the chalk of smashed concrete. He doesn't watch long. Watching is how you drift. Doors closed, the bombardier says. The box turns on the briefed point as if on a hinge. For one long breath, the city remembers silence. The sirens fade to a cough and people speak in library voices. Teresa presses the ledger flat to stop its trembling. She writes cancelled beside 3 outbound entries and then, more honestly, delayed indefinitely. Outside, a semaphore arm points nowhere at all. Then a runner from Signals appears in the doorway, red-faced, bright with sweat. Another formation, he says, tone caught between disbelief and a laugh he cannot quite make. From the sea. The phrase can't find purchase in the old grammar of raids. It implies a world with new hours. Teresa looks at the clock, which still insists on ordinary time, and understands that noon has split into chapters. The bell tries again, hoarse now. San Lorenzo breathes under a sky that has learned a new word. The word is waves. The first has passed, the second is inbound. The day, which began as a problem of trains and cargo, has become a schedule written in contrails and kept by strangers who arrive on time. After the first wave, the yard smells changed, as if the sun cooked cordite into the brick. A bent semaphore arm holds its instruction forever. Teresa works between hot rails and glass that crunches like ice, making lists that feel like prayers: outbound coal, delayed, livestock, watered, artillery spares, status unknown. Sirens run down like exhausted men. A child points seaward. What returns is not the morning thunder, but a sharper music. The engines slice rather than rumble, 2-engined blades carving the light. Above the bay, the shapes are sleeker, shadows thrown fast across roofs. These are mediums, B-25s and B-26s, arriving in the deliberate quiet between shocks. It would have been planned this way, weathermen reading Mediterranean haze, operations writing grease pencil schedules, intelligence setting target order like sheet music. Heavies clawed the yards. Now the airfields must be stripped of reply. Ciampino's runways lie long and white like bones. Medium crews fly lower, faster, steadier than civilians imagine. Discipline sounds like restraint. Captain Ruth Ruddy Blakely checks fuel and calls the relay. High cover slides into position while her element drifts toward duty's end precisely as doctrine intends. Escort works like a moving picket fence. One flight hands off, another arrives with fresh oxygen bottles, clean visors, radios crisp. They will chaperone the mediums in, meet heavies aggressing, and then pass guardianship again, geometry and patience beating bravery's itch. Ruddy jettisons an empty drop tank with a hollow thud that feels like a clock striking. At Ciampino, Enzo hears the second instrument before he sees it and tastes that small professional shame, caught out by someone else's schedule. Fuel Bowsers buck over cracked tarmac. A driver waves apology that helps no one. Radio chatter snaps like pistol fire, half words chewed by interference. Pietro fastens a cowling by muscle memory. His knuckles bleed and he doesn't notice. Enzo swings for the field's edge, throttle full, and climbs into bad options. The mediums cut at Ciampino like knives. Their loads, 2,000 to 4,000 pounds, are smaller than a fortress's, but the precision is a kind of cruelty. Runways cough neat squares of concrete. Dispersal hardstands spit dust. Fuel Bowsers tumble like kicked cans. A hangar door full of spare propellers becomes empty air. A marauder wobbles, catches itself, and goes on, pure line through chaos. Ruddy's section hangs above, stern guardians, denying every romance. No hot chase that leaves the box naked, no private duel that flatters a pilot at a formation's expense. On the ground, Teresa inspects cisterns, chalks a path to move water without crossing buckled track, thanks a railway policeman who has pried open livestock cars with gentleness. Smoke leans purposefully east. Heat stacks on fear until the body cannot tell which is which. She writes cancelled, then thinks better, and writes delayed indefinitely, a curse and a truth. A neighbour hands her a flask. The liquor burns like honesty. Numbers gather in the sky like weather fronts. Darrow, outbound and level, senses the pattern more than sees it. City, then airfields, then again the city later. packages placed with an accounting elegance his machinist father would have admired. He recalls rows of crated engines at a southern depot, hundreds of Pratt & Whitney R1830s like promises, and does crude math that still startles him. You can lose airplanes and not lose tempo. You can schedule warfare like rail timetables, and the trains arrive. Enzo's pass is rude and short. His 20s bracket a Mitchell that does not flinch. A lightning slides down the angle, not predatory so much as managerial, and Enzo must break. He curses once and cuts it off like a wire. Looking over his shoulder, he sees fresh contrails far to the southwest, beyond the mediums, beyond the fighting, the sky already reloading for later. The controller's voice, thin with fatigue, reports, "Additional heavies inbound." Enzo laughs, a single dry bark he cannot help. The yard stinks of fuel and iron, and something sweet Teresa cannot place until she realizes a freight of wine has shattered. She wipes her pen and draws a new ledger column. Lives accounted for, not yet found. The bell of a church that refused to die rings a clean note. Hours used to mean something. Now the day divides into raids, hands of a clock replaced by streams of aircraft that keep appointment with unnerving politeness. What most people never knew about Rome's first bombardment was not the violence of a strike, but the politeness of a schedule. Heavies in the morning, mediums at noon, escorts paired like dancers, and still another wave forming because a free nation's factories could keep promises the way clocks do. The revelation is not only that damage accumulates, it is that certainty does. Teresa puts down her pen and watches dust settle on the rail like snow. Darrow's hands shake only when the fortress flies straight and the oxygen mask hangs at his neck. In the lull between packages, he rubs his eyes and lets the hum of 4 R1820 smooths his nerves back into their slots. Routine feels fragile when you have seen it save you. One checklist word misheard and the system stutters. One toggle missed and a box loses its symmetry. He thinks of the morning brief, the calm accuracy of operations officers who arranged altitudes and timing so neatly the sky itself obeyed. Ruddy checks her pulse, then the fuel totalizer, and trusts the second more. The relay works. Fresh escorts slip into place while her section keeps the egress corridor tidy. A green pilot holds station like a natural. "Good spacing, too," she says, and the tiny compliment steadies them both. Doctrine forbids cowboy runs, and doctrine is merciful. Victory is a product, a schedule, not a flourish. She marks flak like a seamstress marks hems and waits for the next handover to thread the needle. At Ciampino, quiet doesn't mean rest. Pietro has made 8 runs to the fuel bowser. The armourer's palms glow angry red. The chief whispers arithmetic of spares that adds up to fewer sorties than heart desires. Enzo drinks from a hot canteen and asks after tyres. A shrug, a joke that tries for lightness. Radios crackle again. The canopy burns his palms as he drops into the seat. The DB605 catches with a proud bark. He rolls before doubt can build. Teresa moves people as if moving freight, profession without cruelty. Children go where the brick is thickest, the old where benches take weight, the wounded where stretchers can slide. Names are written when someone remembers. Lines are drawn where memory will fill them later. She thinks of trains as living things, and it helps. Ash falls like new snow and sticks to sweat. The air tastes like plaster. The thing civilians do not know, precision is rhythm before it is aim. The weapon is the schedule. Today is written like music. Heavies on rail hubs, mediums on airfields, escorts orchestrated so that when one melody fades, another swells. Defenders fly with craft. Enzo forces a head-on pass through good fire. Flak crews turn steel rifles until their hands refuse tools, yet the tempo belongs elsewhere. When Ruddy hears fresh calls, bandits, angels 15, she answers in the dry tenor of procedure and feels the strength of having more flights behind her than the enemy has ours. Darrow finds a folded pamphlet in a pocket, training day handout he never threw away. He smooths the paper and reads the line that once felt like propaganda. Projected American aircraft production approaching 96,000 in the coming year if bottlenecks ease. It had seemed mythic, a number on the far side of belief. Today it has a smell and a sound. Fresh engines on pallets, clean oxygen bottles, spare prop governors wrapped like bread. He understands that abundance creates patience, and patience wins. Enzo squares for another try and knows the geometry is wrong. He slides anyway because men on the ground have bled to make his airplane right. A lightning meets him early with a block so sober it humiliates romance. He breaks off, watches contrails stack beyond the haze, and recognizes a professional truth that stings. He is fighting not a sortie, but a system. Valor can buy seconds. The enemy is spending hours. Teresa reopens her ledger because paper tells the truth slowly. She creates columns that confess uncertainty with honor. Would have arrived, likely to be rerouted, typically handled by the night shift. Data will be late, as it always is when cities bleed. She will not lie to herself before facts arrive. She writes the careful verbs the way a pilot respects airspeed. Afternoon turns brass. Soldiers sing off-key to hold themselves together. Far southwest, a fresh glitter forms, marching toward the city like a promise kept. The crowd does not curse or cheer. It braces. Jack checks his watch. Ruddy checks oxygen. Enzo kisses 2 fingers to the panel. Teresa closes the ledger to keep it clean. The day has learned the meaning of repeatability, and once you learn that vocabulary, you can no longer imagine a world that moves differently. Mid-afternoon, the air is barnacled with smoke and contrails, yet the schedule keeps its square edges. A next wave moves like a decision already made. Teresa sips warm water that tastes of tin and dust. A railway policeman points west and says nothing. The silence is a briefing. She hears the coming first through her skin, then with her ears. Not the freight ship thrum of fortresses, not the slicing tenor of marauders, but another register layered behind the melody. The sky builds chords. Darrow senses the hum before instruments name it. He is one rivet in a great lattice and still can feel how ingress and egress braid without collision. The ops map returns with new gravity. Route lines crossing at altitude gates, escorts posted at turn points like traffic cops who never eat lunch. Someone drew those arrows. Someone ordered spare turbos by the pallet. Someone parked oxygen trucks in the right shade at dawn. This is what system means when you can smell it. Ruddy holds her section where the P-38 is honest about its strengths. She denies the vertical bounce, denies the low slash that would turn into a duel and a dead wingman. Doctrine is a friend that refuses flattery. High cover holds, she says, and hears 3 voices answer. The relief flight appears 3 minutes earlier than worst case, a small gift that changes fuel math and keeps the convoy whole. Timing is a currency, and today America has brought cash. At Ciampino, an intelligence officer with a clipboard would have done arithmetic that hurts pride. After 2 heavy fights, the squadron is below strength, not because courage failed, but because minutes did. Radios are better than last year, aircraft are finer, but fuel, tyres and DB-605 hours remain indifferent to valour. Pietro sits, sees the blood on his knuckles, laughs because laughter is free. Enzo walks the line. Each Machi looks eager as a thoroughbred and as mortal as a shoe. The medium's work at Ciampino is visible from the city. New craters checker runways. Dispersal sheds smoke. A fuel bowser lies on its side like a murdered ox. Teresa writes what she can. Northbound traffic cancelled. Switching crews unaccounted. Livestock watered. Hospital train expected uncertain. And threads between pockets of civilians with the unsentimental grace of service. A nun scolds her for not sitting. Teresa smiles and keeps moving because ledgers are mercy when food and trains are counting on you. Then comes the moment that turns professionals into believers. Willow Run, a plant in America, is said to be turning out a B-24 every hour at peak, impossible on its face until you have walked past depot rows of engines and seen they are not metaphors. Darrow has walked that row. 96,000 aircraft projected in a single year, if bottlenecks ease is a statistic that feels like propaganda until a day like this plays on time. Italy's totals, brave and real, cannot be stretched across such chasms. The impossible number is not hype, it is a schedule. Ruddy thinks in those terms without poetry. Precision this crisp implies spare radios, clean guns, instruments that will still work tomorrow. She can feel a continent in the firmness of a toggle switch. She does not say freedom or industry on the air, she says, "To Titan," and means both. The P-38's twin booms cut the light like rails of a bridge you don't notice until you cross it. Enzo launches again into bad options and makes the least bad good with skill. A lightning bars his path, courteous and implacable, a schoolmaster of geometry. He tries a feint that would have humiliated a lesser opponent and fails without shame. He breaks at the edge of flak, canopy hammering with wind, heart punching his ribs. The lesson is not personal. The lesson is systemic. By evening, the smell over Rome is complicated. Cordite, fuel, spilled wine, plaster dust, the must of old paper in Teresa's hands. She writes names where she can, tasks where she cannot. Would have arrived, likely rerouted, typically handled by night shift. The careful verbs are a kind of honour. Somewhere a bell finds its voice and counts an hour in a day that has forgotten clocks. Engines recede. The quiet that follows is not peace but intermission. Night would have made the day merciful, but the day insists on a coda. Heavies have bruised the yards, mediums have sliced the airfields, yet cadence wants closure. Darrow feels it in the precise pivot of egress, the way boxes swing through turnpoints as if the map had become law. In another fortress, a gunner waves a glove like a man tipping his hat at a factory whistle. Jack thinks of his father on a plant floor and understands. This is a shift ending, not a battle ending. Ruddy's section is down to clean oxygen and warn patients. Doctrine would permit flourish in an emptying sky. Doctrine does not. Relay arrives punctual and humble, competence in formation. She hands over with a voice that refuses pride and turns for home, resisting the old sin of chase. Debrief will ask what made the escort work. She already knows. Planning, radios, maintenance, humility. Glamour is accident. Procedure is victory. On the ground, Enzo receives the order he feared and honours. Stand down, preserve hours, save the machine for tomorrow. If there is fuel, if there are tyres, if the road to the depot isn't cut by someone else's arithmetic. He says nothing into the throat mic. Nothing he can say improves the day. Pietro sits on a toolbox and sleeps without deciding to. The field tastes of hot metal and weary hope. Enzo watches airplanes he was born to chase and feels not defeat but a new species of honesty. Teresa finds a route to water the stock cars without crossing rails buckled into useless snakes. She teaches it to others like a conductor teaching a piece the audience won't hear but will feel. In the office, she adds a sentence to the ledger's margin. Lives accounted for 42, to be found many. She is not given to poetry, but the pen wanders. The sweetness of spilled wine has soaked into wood. She will come to hate it. In the briefing hut, a young officer circles San Lorenzo and Littorio with chalk and then smears it across the board to show how delayed fuses lift rails and warp girders like licorice. He reads tonnage as if tallying groceries. Darrow lets the math wash through, adding his private column, how many engines he saw in depot rows, how many prop governors in crates, how many oxygen bottles stacked in shade. He realizes that logistics is a sermon best preached in quiet rooms and proved in loud ones. The impossible statistic today is not only that a single American year approaches 96,000 airplanes, or that Willow Run finishes a B-24 every hour at fever pitch. It is that a schedule can be as lethal as an ace. Italy's totals, gallant, ingenious, cannot be stretched across such a gap. You do not beat an enemy like this by meeting his first wave well. You beat him by discovering that the first wave is not the day. Enzo writes a note for comrades he will not see because the roads are wounded. We flew hard. We will fly hard again. He does not add the secret that stung him, the shape of tomorrow seen in stacked contrails, because professionals file knowledge beside airspeeds and clock codes, not beside feelings. Ruddy lands to a traffic pattern that looks like a factory yard at shift change. Trucks, people, signals, all in lanes. She taxis, kills the lightning, and hears America in little sounds. Mess line laughter, a crew chief's affectionate profanity, the clink of mugs, a pencil scrape. Gratitude sneaks up on her. The system worked because people chose to be excellent at small things. Teresa walks home past saints powdered by brick dust. She carries her ledger like a relic. The sirens have gone timid. Somewhere, far out to sea, an engine leans down into silence. The day stands unfinished, yet the sky smells like a promise kept by strangers whose names she will never know. Rome has learned a noun that was not in its peacetime grammar. The noun is waves. Night comes without coolness. Heat clings to stone and rail. The city lies awake like a patient who does not trust morphine. Teresa sleeps in a chair beside the ledger because desks feel like duty posts, and trains, if they move at all, move in darkness. She would have gone home if lines were clear. Typically, she would have stopped for bread. Tonight she keeps watch as if the yard were her child. A lantern makes a small cone of order in a room where paper flakes from walls like snow. Darrow's crew crowds a debrief table sour with coffee and carbon paper. The photo interpreter lays out strike images, San Lorenzo and Littorio in black and white geometry, switch ladders and roundhouses scarred into illegibility. "Good hits," the lieutenant says with a bookkeeper's calm. The bombardier notes wind drift and promises to shave a hair next time. Gunners exchange stories that calibrate fear rather than boast. Jack keeps hearing the line from a training pamphlet, 96,000 aircraft projected in a single year, and, for the first time, believes it with his hands. Ruddy works her boots off and flexes her toes, thinking of her pilots like a mother when the house is finally quiet. She inventories bent metal and shaken nerves and the small moral injuries that come from denying hero poses for the sake of the box. When operations asks about relay timing, she redraws a triangle in the air, a tiny classroom for a tired sergeant, and feels the secret pride of a doctrine that teaches ordinary people to do extraordinary things on schedule. At Ciampino, maintenance lamps throw puddles of light. Pietro and the chief speak in the telegraph of pointing fingers and nods, the grammar of men hoarding strength. They look at tyres the way a farmer looks at a last pair of oxen. They do not talk about fuel because talking invites anger. Enzo drafts a report with care because accuracy is respect. Airframes serviceable, lines replaced, radios intermittent, pilots fit to fly. Hours remaining on DB605S counted like breath. The day's statistics, as far as midnight can see, come in honest ranges. Roughly 1 to 200 heavy bombers over the rails in the morning, more than 100 mediums over airfields later, 4 significant packages in a single sun's arc. Civilian totals measured in bands because truth has blur when cities burn. Rail capacity reduced by a number that sounds abstract until a hospital train is late. Metrics feel cold until Teresa writes a name beside them. She wakes from a doze to the softest yard sound, a coupler's kiss as 2 cars meet. Someone has found a way around a wound. She follows the noise and discovers 3 men with lanterns and a plan. 10 cars, if nothing fails, food, medicine, tools, to neighbourhoods the war forgot to cut. She writes their names in the ledger margin, where a supervisor will see them, and holds a lantern while they coax steel into obedience. Work done well is its own consolation. Jack walks the line of parked fortresses under a sky that still remembers contrails. He runs a glove along a wing's leading edge and thinks of Willow Run and hourly B-24s, of crates of engines like corn in a silo. He imagines clocks in different time zones ringing the same discipline. A rivet set here, a yoke steady there, a whistle, a bell. He thinks of Italy's beautiful fighters, of Enzo without knowing him, of men choosing angles with courage inside systems that are larger than any one cockpit. Ruddy finally writes the sentence she couldn't find. We won today because the system worked. In the margin, she lists 3 proofs: weather window exploited, relay punctual, maintenance depth sufficient for turnarounds that used to feel like miracles. She leaves luck off the page. It cannot be taught. Doctrine is jealous of what cannot be taught. Enzo steps outside the hangar and breathes night that tastes like dust. Far off, a truck engine refuses to surrender a ruined road. He salutes the sound with 2 fingers to his cap. The schedule that beat him today is not a god. It is a human machine. Men can learn machines. He will fly tomorrow if there is fuel. If not, he will train and memorize and be brave in a way that doesn't waste friends. Teresa closes the ledger, tucks it beneath the chair, and lets the basilica bell count her towards sleep. Rome's new word, waves, doesn't mean ruin alone. It also means rhythm, and rhythm, she decides, can be survived if people step in time. Dawn finds the rails cold to the touch and warped like noodles where delayed fuses did their quiet work. Teresa stands at the edge of San Lorenzo with a survey crew that has borrowed a priest's ladder and a carpenter's string, 2 tools that belong to peace but answer to war. The air tastes of soot and yesterday's wine soured by heat. On a siding, a hospital train waits with its lamps covered, disciplined enough to make the heart ache. The semaphore that could not decide yesterday now points blindly at the morning, a dead saint's finger begging the sky to behave. Every disaster becomes a diagram if you make yourself enough of a professional to draw the lines. Teresa draws them. Fish plates are counted, bent rail traced, switch levers tested for truth. The foreman taps a joint with his boot and reads the dull reply like a doctor with a stethoscope. She writes verbs that do not lie, would have carried, likely splicable, typically repairable by dusk if steel reaches from the east. She has learned to borrow the future tense without promising it. Jack is up before the brief, walking the perimeter like a man checking a barn he built himself. Crew chiefs pull spark plugs that look perfect and replace them anyway, because procedure is a promise. He remembers the mediums sliding into the noon gap and realizes a schedule is kindness to your own fear. Improvisation is what you do when clocks betray you. In the hut, the strike photos come out, black stamps of San Lorenzo and Littorio with rails lifted into cursive, switch yards combed by steel. No one claps. Quiet competence eats applause and grows stronger. Enzo wakes with grit on his teeth and the certainty that skill will be asked to stand in for supply again. Pietro has 2 tires he calls Sunday shoes and mercy enough to save them for a day when luck is worse. Radios answer like sulking children. Fuel Bowsers wobble across cracked tarmac. Enzo runs a rag down the 20mm breeches and murmurs to the Veltro as if talk could turn fumes into octane. Orders are honest. Stand ready for harassment. Preserve hours. Expect the Americans to keep appointment with themselves. Repair gangs set to the rails with a bravery no ballad claims. Sledge and wedge, jack and gauge, a human chain returning steel to law. A man raises a maul and lowers it with priestly rhythm until the joint accepts it. Teresa counts hammer strikes until she realizes counting is prayer. They splice a loop around the worst choke, a limp that will carry food and medicine if the switches mind their manners. She sketches the route with arrows that curl like hope and gives the paper to a driver who salutes without irony. The impossible thing this morning is not one factory's hourly bomber or a 5-digit year total. It is that a city breathes through one lung and does not surrender. Yet numbers hover like weather. Italy, for all her flying genius, will build aircraft in total that a single American year threatens to equal. The yards hit yesterday were not accidents, but policy. You cannot intercept policy with a single heroic climb. You must outlast it, or be outlasted by it. Jack's brief includes tomorrow in pencil. Weather offers a window. Fuel is right. Spares are in hand. A chalk line links a southern field to a knot over the Alps, a thought that seems arrogant until he remembers rows of engines stacked like firewood and men who treat clocks like orders. He feels sorrow for whoever lives under that knot and decides sorrow is not a reason to be imprecise. Enzo flies a short patrol over rails the Americans missed and lands because the mathematics of minutes scowl. A nurse sleeps upright in a truck. A mechanic snores on a crate of cannibalized radios. Courage is everywhere. Gasoline is rare. The Veltro cools with expensive dignity. Pietro pats the cowling as if it were a tired horse and says nothing. By noon, a 10-car train leaves on a route that did not exist at sunrise. Teresa watches it creep past the broken semaphore like a wounded animal learning a new gait, and writes departed in a neat hand that shakes. The basilica bell finds a note it can hold. From far to the southwest, a faint new stitching appears high above the haze, quieter than yesterday, or perhaps the eye is tired. The city has learned to make room in its day for the arrival of schedules flown by strangers. Weeks pass and governments change clothes. The armistice in September opens a door onto another hallway of the same building. Mark the jump. October, then November 1943, as Allied columns seize dusty fields that will learn to answer to the name Foggia. Wheat becomes runway. Cart tracks become taxiways. Tents harden into huts. Huts budge into hangars. A new organ grows at Italy's heel, and the blood that will feed it is gasoline, engines, radios, oxygen, spare tires, doctrine. Jack steps from a truck into a white hammer of sun and blinks at promise. Pierced steel planking like fish scales, fuel bladders fat as whales, crates stenciled like a litany, turbo regulators, oxygen valves, magnetos, chin turret assemblies. Upright on bearers, rows of Pratt & Whitney R1830s stand to like sentries. He thinks of Willow Run and the rumour, an hourly B-24 at peak, and for the first time feels the rumour in his hands. Logistics here is not metaphor. It is a city where breath and fire are warehoused. Ruddy arrives with a map webbed in altitude gates. Her pencil taps rendezvous, relief, loiter, return, a drum major's baton teaching dancers to breathe together. The Alps are the blue teeth of a saw. Wall when you fear them, threshold when you plan. P-38S stretch first. P-51S will take deep cover when they arrive in flocks, long legs fed by drop tanks that make arithmetic sing. She tells young leaders the trick. Refuse chase when chase becomes vanity. Escort is management, not romance. Italian skies learn traffic patterns that even enemy ministers cannot help noticing. From Bari and Foggia, heavy streams climb almost every clear day of 1944. Contrails cross valleys like chalk hauled on glass. A man who keeps lists will later admit he read omens of defeat in that blue southern sky. When weather closes, silence takes the roots and the workshops howl. Maintenance becomes liturgy. Engines swap before they plead. Radios behave because habit bullies them into obedience. Guns lose their grudges under cloth and oil. Enzo survives the fall and the split of loyalties. He flies when fuel says yes, trains when it says no, sits at a desk that speaks Italian and German by turns, and writes readiness with a bookkeeper's modesty. The C-205 remains a blade in a craftsman's hand. The G-55 flashes excellence in numbers too small to satisfy appetite. Tires come by favours that make the soul feel smaller. He is not ashamed. He is a professional, and professionals respect scarcity, the way sailors respect reefs. The Americans make a city of airfields do city things at once. Mess lines move like rivers. Laundry snaps like truce flags in a country called Clean Socks. Chaplains preach beside crates of prop governors. Photo labs cough negatives that become intelligence, that becomes arrows, that become rails lifted and oil tanks blossoming. Jack understands what he only sensed over Rome. Procedures raise courage's ceiling. You can do another hard thing tomorrow if you keep the rules today. Now say the number that draws flies and faith. One American calendar year approaches 96,000 airplanes if bottlenecks keep easing. Italy's total will never threaten that figure. Somewhere a rivet gun barks in Michigan. Somewhere a liberator answers a chalk mark. Somewhere a crate leaves a dock so that today here an oxygen bottle slides into shade. A continent-sized factory breathes through men who show up on time. Ruddy walks a new strip and calculates the relief triangle for a mission that will touch 3 countries and 4 languages while speaking 1 grammar: fuel, altitude, rendezvous, return. She teaches a green lead to recognize the instant a pursuit becomes vanity and to surrender it like a bad habit. Oxygen discipline is church, she says so, and they nod because doctrine has been feeding them better than bravado. One afternoon, Jack passes a depot where oxygen bottles lie in a long green herd and understands that breath itself has been industrialized. He touches cool steel and thinks of Teresa's ledger, Enzo's tires, Ruddy's toggles, a chorus of small honest acts amplified until the Alps look like high ground instead of fate. The war has changed shape. It is not a duel. It is a factory run from 20 places at once, and its products are intervals, schedules, outcomes written in contrails. The sun falls on Foggia with a promise. The next clear morning the sky will lift a second front over the Alps. When it does, waves will mean not one Roman day, but a season over Europe. Men will still meet death bravely. Their courage will still matter. But the greater instrument will be time kept faithfully, and the metronome will sit on a workbench far from any front. Back to Rome, late afternoon of the 19th of July, because some truths burn brightest when hands blister and barrels glow. The 4th package arrives like a chorus returning with the tune perfected. At an 88mm pit, the crew has spent men as freely as shells. The loader's shoulder is purple where recoil kissed him. The captain's voice comes raw, counting elevation and fuse with the tired exactitude that comforts surgeons and soldiers both. They have done well, they always do. The sky answers with punctual indifference. Teresa is at her desk because paper still moves trains when rails cannot. New columns did not exist at breakfast. Lives, water points, shelters, routes that are less dangerous than the others. She writes the verbs of a war she did not start. Would have, likely, typically. The lamp smokes, the room smells of singed paper and wine that refuses to dry. She listens for engines like a station master learning birdsong by species, the low freight ship thunder of heavies, the slicing tenor of mediums, the twin-boom whine that means shepherds overhead. The first concussions from Ciampino reach the yard like a neighbour slamming a door. Darrow's box is gone to sea and silence, but another group is doing the work because someone scheduled it, because spare turbos and fresh gunners and clean oxygen bottles turn turnarounds into cadence instead of miracle. If this were a duel, the defenders' courage would be the equal of the attackers. It is not a duel. It is a timetable printed in contrails. Enzo stands by the line and watches an airplane he loves cool into bronze evening. Orders keep him on the ground for the arithmetic of tomorrow. He does not argue because arguing does not create fuel. Over the field, a pair of lightnings wander like conscientious constables, patient and unromantic. He remembers mornings when initiative belonged to his side and attaches respect rather than envy to competence. He writes a note to himself he will keep for years. Survive the schedule. Do not let it turn you into a story instead of a pilot. At the flak pit, the barrel change comes late because men are not machines. The new tube goes on with a hiss that sounds angrier than heat. Elevation, fuse, fire. A band that has played together since school. They get their licks in. They will again. The problem is not skill. The problem is minutes and miles and the mammal fact of fatigue. A single shift defense can fight one wave brilliantly. Against four, brilliance becomes an ingredient rather than a meal. On the ledger, Teresa crosses out cancelled and writes departed beside a single medical consist that has found a patched path around ruin. She smiles despite herself and then flinches at the blast that claims the smile back. Under the desk that became a trench, she realizes without bitterness that her war is the aviator's war in miniature, a system, not an episode, a schedule, not a scene. She will remember that sentence for the rest of her life. Now the impossible statistic, here where sweat turns dust to paste. 1 American year can pour more airplanes into the sky than Italy can count for the whole war. It sounds like boasting until you lay it beside this hour. Flak crews at the limits of muscle memory, facing a fourth package that arrives like a bus-keeping route. If the attacker can do this tomorrow and the day after, the question changes from who flies best to who can afford time. America pays in cash and carries exact change. Enzo writes in his pocket notebook because pen and paper turn despair into competence. Fuel by squadron, airframes serviceable, pilots fit, radios not good, not hopeless, tires, Sunday shoes, intact. He closes the book because a lightning hangs like a question over the field, and he refuses the vanity of believing it watches him. It watches a schedule. Twilight drains colour from ruins and gives shapes back to streets. The last engines diminish until ears invent them from habit. The 88 crew finally stands down and counts bodies and shells with the tender fairness of men who earned gentleness. Teresa locks the ledger in a drawer that sticks and thinks almost calmly that whoever drew today's arrows discovered a law older than any army. Unrelenting regularity breaks stone, and stone is what cities are made of. Morning follows like a rule rather than an accident. The city wears poultices, the yard wears chalk. Teresa unlocks the office and lifts the ledger as if visiting a patient. Numbers today are names with the ink rubbed thin. The prefect wants casualty bands that do not lie. The railway wants a schedule that pretends to be sane. She sharpens a pencil with the knife that once cut bread and begins with the honest verbs, estimated, confirmed, unknown. She writes like a medic, fast, gentle, precise. Jack stands in a debrief line with coffee that tastes of tin and a steadier heart. The photo table is a black altar, prints of San Lorenzo twisted, Littorio gouged, Ciampino freckled like a pox. The interpreter uses a ruler the way a surgeon uses a finger, measuring craters for intent and effect, reading shadows for depth. Good work, he says with a cashier's modesty. Losses are read in a voice that refuses melodrama. 2 names echo. Echo is what the living do for the dead. Ruddy briefs replacements under a wing that smells of fuel and warm rubber. She speaks escort in the grammar of cold mercy, hold high cover, deny the bounce, make your relief like clockwork, never chase. Oxygen discipline is church. A young pilot tries a joke about hero shots and colours at his own mouth. She lets him blush and then explains, kind enough to be unforgettable, that glamour is an invoice courage pays with the lives of strangers. Enzo submits readiness numbers that satisfy truth without arousing unhelpful emotion. The figures are not good and not catastrophic. He lists pilots by hours flown because fatigue shaves judgment and staff officers forget that when chairs are soft. Radios are temperamental, engines proud, tires postponed by prayer. Between nouns and numerals, he sneaks a sentence professionals understand. Courage is not an inexhaustible reservoir. Scarcity is geometry, not mood. Teresa adds columns for water points and shelter capacity because administration has become triage. Civilian dead are counted in honest ranges. No one pretends to exactitude. Rail capacity today is the line that will be read in rooms with curtains and maps. She traces yesterday's loop and writes the speed it will bear without bursting. Under the numbers, she writes 2 names, small and neat, because they carried a lantern while the city forgot how. The impossible statistic sits beside the coffee and keeps quiet. A single American year approaching 96,000 aircraft would allow a nation to lose an air force the size of Italy's and still make schedule. Jack does not say it aloud because gloating is a poor memorial. He notes instead that engines ran clean, radios were crisp, relief arrived on time. Room temperature rises a degree you could measure. Ruddy eats with crew chiefs and asks what broke. What broke matters more than what flew. A supercharger that stuck, a loose radio ground, a tyre that bubbled under heat. She writes the list in a notebook that also contains birthdays and prayers. Her doctrine is simplicity armed with discipline. She has seen wars lost by complicated answers. A sergeant tells how a prop governor swapped in 20 minutes kept a ship in the air. She laughs the way believers laugh at small miracles. Enzo lights a candle for a comrade he cannot prove is dead and asks not for victory but for hours of sleep, gasoline, and a radio that speaks plainly. He has seen the enemy build a way of war compatible with human weakness and resolves to imitate humility if not ideology. When a courier brings orders that taste of delay, he receives them without flinching. The sky will be there tomorrow. He intends to meet it standing. Teresa delivers her report through streets where dust has settled into every day. The Basilica bell finds a working note. She turns in the pages and fixes a hinge, because hinges keep doors honest, and honest doors keep a city moving. On the way back, a child skips. Hope commits its small treason. By midday, the plan is neither gallant nor pretty, and very likely to function. Yards will breathe through a straw. Hospitals will drink first. Food trains will move like escorted generals. South, on fields that were wheat, men brief for climbs toward the Alps with the steadiness of practice. The day after revelation is never dramatic. It is a ledger balanced, a tire changed, a lunch eaten with a pencil behind the ear. Time jumps by agreement. 1944, spring into summer, clear days that feel factory-made. From Bari to Foggia to Cerignola, the runways lie like piano keys, and when morning taps them, sound climbs the peninsula and pours over the Alps. Jack watches forklifts ballet oxygen bottles into shade and thinks of breath as inventory. He climbs into a B-24 because the schedule asks it, and the Liberator answers with a new timbre, fatter, a little coarser, full of purpose. South wind is kind. The takeoff roll is the sound of policy. Ruddy leads a mix of P-38s and P-51s now, long-legged and lacquer-scented. Her voice is Professor Calm as she assigns relief triangles to pilots who've flown enough to understand mercy. Rendezvous is a point you can measure on a map and in your ribs. High cover keeps its promise. Low cover finds the lost. Lag hangs back like a shepherd who knows wolves love the slow. Doctrine sings when everyone breathes on the beat. Contrails form lanes the way a plan becomes law. Over high passes, the bomber stream spreads to cruising interval and locks like a machine in groove. It happens so often that enemies who cannot stop it keep watching, as if observation could suggest a lever. A minister in a black car looks up from a mountain road and whispers a verdict that will be famous later. In the moment, it is professional respect framed as dread. Far below, a woman pins laundry and blesses wind that smells of snow. Enzo flies when fuel says yes and ground fire says maybe, looks up from a northern field and sees 4 strata: lead, high cover, low cover, lag, wall rather than fence. He briefs head-on passes when possible. Break clean, do not chase through the escort, live to try again. He tells the truth. Pursuit beyond the box becomes romance, and romance is hard on tires. His pilots nod like men who have earned the right to be called grown. Jack's navigator calls drift and time to target, while a spare engine rides the floor on a pallet because someone thought ahead about repair at a forward strip. Logistics is love in this version of the world. Bomb doors open on cue. The site settles like law. Targets today are north of Italy's borders, arithmetic rather than triumph. The Southern Front has become a platform for a second heavy bomber war, while the first punches from England. The enemy's breath grows shallow under the weight of routine. Ruddy's section saves a straggler without becoming heroes about it. 2 P-51s bracket the lame ship and menace temptation. When fuel math begins to frown, she swaps relief early and counts the gift against fatigue later. Pilots land with fuel in the tanks and temper left for grief. Quiet disciplines keep people alive. Never return with tanks dry, never land angry, never let bravado borrow tomorrow's strength. When weather closes the Alps, the ground roars. Maintenance is liturgy and art. Engines swap in hours. Radios become obedient by habit. Bomb fins get stenciled, turrets lubed, guns cleaned until steel smiles. The miracle is not genius, but ritual excellence practiced without applause. From rites flow schedules. From schedules, outcomes counted in rails unlaid, oil not burned, factories that do not hum. And now the season's impossible view. 2 air forces, 8th from England, 15th from Italy, launch heavy streams so frequently that a continent watches calendars instead of clocks. The enemy learned to fight expeditions. It struggles to fight routines. Enzo writes the times he hears contrails and the times he does not. The pattern hurts and instructs. He tells young men the best advice grown men receive: survive, learn, return. Jack flies home over passes that look friendly now that maps know their names. He counts what didn't fail because invisible hands made it obedient. Voltage regulators, oxygen lines, the map case clip that kept the wind from stealing the war. Humility arrives the way a runway does, suddenly, then obviously. He is one rivet in a beautiful competence. Ruddy parks with the symmetry of a metronome and, in the sudden quiet, hears laughter, clatter, a hymn. She thinks of Rome's day that taught a new noun and understands the waves have become climate. Policy flies now, not just airplanes. And policy, once airborne, is as hard to catch as light. We end where schedules meet souls. Rome's ledger is bound in twine and stored on a shelf that smells of dust and sanctity. Teresa writes one last line in a small hand. Accounts closed, routes recharted, losses remembered by name when possible and by care when not. She may marry or not. She will ride a post-war train and judge its honesty by the way couplers kiss. Her war was a desk that became a trench, a lamp that made a little cone of order, a habit of verbs that refused lies. She keeps the pencil. Jack stands in a hangar that has become a chapel by the slow accretion of names. A crew chief brings coffee the colour of courage and says the engine swap finished early. Jack smiles and thinks of hourly liberators and a nation that built enough engines to afford patience. He remembers hands, not slogans. Women at rivet guns, men at benches, kids with bicycles running messages, and understands that freedom's best rhetoric is talk measured at a prop shaft. He will go home and teach talk by other names. Ruddy walks the line at dusk and runs her fingers along dents no one will bother to smooth. She has led boys through geometry and taught them the humility of fuel and the grace of radios that work. She will never boast that doctrine saved more lives than any flourish. She will think it, sometimes, in a warm kitchen when a timer dings and dinner arrives on time. She carried policy on her wings and kept it from vanity's cliff. Adulthood, she suspects, feels like this. Enzo closes a logbook that smells of oil and paper and the unkillable pride of craft. He did not lose for lack of nerve or airplane. He lost to a system that turned weather, fuel and spare parts into law. He honours it by learning from it. He will fly again in a different sky under a different flag and teach students to respect minutes, not myths. He will remember a lightning that blocked him without malice and a day when Rome learned plural. Now the farewell's impossible statistic, the quietest and therefore truest. An American year could match or exceed an entire enemy's war in aircraft alone, and the best measure of that miracle is a ledger entry that reads on time. Somewhere a factory stamped its last B-24 while Teresa stamped a form, and both acts were the same prayer. Keep schedule, keep faith. Italy's totals were brave, America's were inexhaustible. Democracy hired both courage and competence and put them to work on a clock. We mark consequences not by speeches, but by rails that run. Foggia stayed busy until the work was done. The Alps learned contrails like seasons. Factories that once built bombers learned refrigerators and tractors because abundance bends toward life if you let it. Bells were rehung, bridges mended. In offices where arrows once moved like bayonets, engineers drew roads and dams. A minister who feared the blue learned to live under it. None of this makes graves smaller. Teresa writes 2 names that never came back into the ledger margin because margins are where the heart keeps accounts. Jack visits a cemetery and talks to a stone with the awkward eloquence of the living. Ruddy writes to parents who will hold the letter like bread. Enzo stands on a hill and salutes nothing visible. The system that won was made from such moments arranged in a schedule, the only human magic both ordinary and holy. We do not pretend inevitability. Another nation could have built numbers and wasted them. Another pilot could have chased glory until boxes died. Another clerk could have lied about trains and fed the wrong mouths. What happened instead was a generation insisting that systems be honest and people be brave. That combination is rarer than myths admit. It is why waves became weather and weather became victory. Years later, a child asks what the war felt like. Teresa says it smelled of hot paper and wine. Jack says it sounded like 4 engines finding harmony. Ruddy says it tasted like oxygen dry as chalk. Enzo says it looked like lanes of white written across a summer sky. None of them mentions numbers first, but the numbers stand patient behind every sentence, victorious without bragging. Some evenings the bell at San Lorenzo rings and the city answers with laughter rather than sirens. A train crosses the yard at the honest speed its rails can bear. Over the Tyrrhenian the sunset lays a contrail of its own, a reminder drawn by light. The word Rome learned, waves, has softened into history. What remains is schedule kept, promises met, and a freedom